Hey folks, welcome back to Legacy of Old Age. Picture this, an old-timer sneaking a peek at his wife's hips like it's their first dance at the county fair, or maybe a widow whispering bedroom secrets over a cup of tea that's shaking in her hands. Does that sound wild to you? Or does it tug at a dusty corner of your own past? Today, we're stepping into that quiet little nook of growing old where the fire still crackles, the kind of heat that gets you tangled up in the sheets, even when the years say you're supposed to be past all that nonsense. We're talking sex, folks, and whether it's some odd hiccup or just the way life keeps humming along for us seniors. Stick with me, because I've got some yarns that'll tickle your funny bone, pull at your heart, and maybe even leave you blushing, plus a trick or two to keep that old spark from fizzling out. In the miles ahead, you'll hear about an uncle who wouldn't quit flirting with his gal, even at 79, a widow who taught me more than I bargained for over tea, a diner regular with a hunger that had shocked the young ones, and a twist from my own pop that hit me like a sack of feed. So grab a coffee or whatever you sipped back in the day and settle in, folks. This road's got some curves worth riding. It all started one sweltering July night, back when I was still hauling my bones around my Uncle Ray's place down in Arkansas. The sun was dipping low, painting the sky a bruised purple, and the air hung thick with that damp, earthy smell of summer, the kind that sticks to your shirt like a needy pup. Crickets were hollering loud enough to drown out my boots crunching on the gravel as I lugged an armful of firewood toward the shed. That's when I caught him, Uncle Ray, 79 if he was a day, perched in his creaky rocker on the porch, staring out at Aunt Clara like she was the last slice of pie at a church supper. She was out by the shed, wrestling a tangle of garden hose in that old denim skirt she'd patched a dozen times, her gray hair spilling loose from a bun like it had given up the fight. The way Ray's eyes tracked her slow, sly, lingering on the sway of her hips, you'd swear they were still sweethearts sneaking kisses behind the barn, not hitched for 50-odd years. His lips curled into a grin that could melt butter, and I couldn't help myself. I dropped the wood with a thud that echoed through the dusk and laughed out loud. "Uncle Ray," I called, brushing dirt off my hands. "You old dog. Still got that twinkle in your eye, huh?" He didn't even flinch, just rocked back and kept that grin plastered wide as the horizon. Later, we sat around the kitchen table, a scarred oak slab older than me digging into a supper of cornbread crumbling into pools of gravy and fried chicken, so greasy it gleamed under the bare bulb swinging overhead. The air smelled of salt and fat, and Clara was still fussing, wiping her hands on a dish towel that had seen better days. I couldn't resist a jab. "Caught you eyeballing Clara out there," I teased, leaning in with a smirk. He set his fork down, slow as you please, and fixed me with those watery brown eyes that had seen more than I'd ever know. "Son," he rasped, voice like gravel under a tire, "a man don't stop wanting just 'cause his back's bent and his hair's gone. Me and Clara, we still dance the old dance when the moon's up, ain't no harm in it," Clara snorted from the sink, tossing the towel at him like a whip, but it fluttered to the floor as she turned away, cheeks pinker than the sunset outside. "Ray, you hush," she muttered, but there was a giggle sneaking out, sharp and quick, like a kid caught with a cookie. I sat there, fork halfway to my mouth, gravy dripping onto the plate, and let that sink in deep. Ray wasn't spinning yarns, he meant every word. And then, as if to prove it, after the dishes were cleared and the house went quiet, I heard their bedroom door creak shut down the hall. A low chuckle has rolled through the wall, followed by her high giggle, like they were sneaking around in their own damn house. I flopped on the couch that night, staring at the cracked ceiling, ears still ringing with that sound, and thought, well, I'll be damned. Ray's still got the reins on that horse. Ever caught that spark flickering in someone you figured was past it, folks? Maybe a sly look across the supper table, a whisper from the old days? Drop it in the comments. I'd love to know if it rings a bell for you. Back in Ray's time, it was all about stolen glances and a creaky bed these days. A little pillow under the hips might keep the dance going smooth. Try it out if you're still stepping to that tune, and tell me how it goes. That night was like a lantern flicking on in my head. Was Ray some rare bird? Or was I just late to the party? That lantern Ray lit stayed burning in my head. Folks, it wasn't just a flicker I could shake off. It simmered there for years, glowing brighter every time I'd spot an old couple holding hands a little too tight, or catch a hushed word that didn't fit the preacher's take on growing old. I figured maybe Ray was a one-of-a-kind spark, a stubborn old cuss who dodged the rule book on aging. But then Mrs. Dora came along, and she didn't just stoke that flame, she turned it into a bonfire I couldn't look away from. It was one of those muggy afternoons down on the Gulf Coast, the kind where the heat presses down like a wet quilt and the cicadas buzz so loud you'd swear they're nesting in your skull. I'd rolled into a little town outside Mobile with a buddy, patching up roofs after a storm tore through trees down, fences busted, shingles scattered like confetti. Dora's place was on the list. A sagging trailer with white paint peeling like sunburnt skin, a front porch that groaned under every step I took. She was waiting there when I pulled up, a tiny slip of a woman, 86, with a cane propped against her chair and a glass of iced tea sweating in her shaky grip. I got to work on her roof, hammering nails into shingles that stank of tar and damp rot, the sun roasting me like a hog on a spit. Dora watched from below, squinting up through a pair of glasses perched crooked on her nose, her white hair tied back in a bun that looked ready to quit. After a couple hours, she waved me down with that cane, stubborn as a schoolmarm who'd caught you napping. "Come sit a spell," she called, voice thin but steady as a wire. My shirt was soaked through, sweat stinging my eyes, and that sun was a mean son of a gun. So I climbed down, dusted off my hands, and took the wobbly chair she pointed to. She poured me a tea from a chipped porcelain pitcher, her hands trembling so bad the ice clinked against the glass like wind chimes on a breezy day. It was lukewarm, sweet enough to curl your tongue into next week, but I sipped it anyway, grateful for the shade of her awning and the break from the heat. We got to chatting small stuff at first, the storm that drowned her tomato patch, the neighbor's dog that wouldn't quit barking until she set her glass down with a little clack that cut through the cicada hum. She fixed me with those cloudy blue eyes, sharp as tacks despite the years, and said, "Young man, folks think when you're old and your man's gone, that part of you just dries up and blows away like dust. But it don't." I froze folks' tea halfway to my lips, caught flat-footed like a deer in a truck's glare. She saw it, that wide-eyed look, and let out a cackle dry as the dirt under her porch. "Don't you go all shy on me now," she said, patting my knee with a hand so frail I could see the veins snaking under her skin like little rivers. "I ain't out chasing tail, mind you, but some nights I lie there in that lumpy old bed of mine, and Henry's still with me, his rough palms sliding down my back, grunting like an old bear when we'd get to tussling under the sheets." Her voice softened, trailing off into a whisper, and she stared past me at the rusted swing set in her yard, like she could see him rocking there, waiting for her. I didn't know what to say. What do you say to that, folks? The air got thick between us, heavier than the Gulf humidity, and it wasn't just the heat weighing it down. She took a shaky breath and kept going, like she'd been holding it in too long. Been 12 years since he passed heart gave out back in '09, but I still dream about him, clear as day. How he'd pull me close under that quilt we got for our wedding, 50 years worn, and still soft as a prayer. How he'd hum some off-key nonsense till I laughed myself silly. Ain't no sin in wanting that again, is it? Even if it's just in my head now. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't let a tear fall, just sat there, chin high, daring me to tell her she was wrong. And I couldn't, folks, because she wasn't. Dora wasn't some broken clock winding down. She was alive, still ticking under all those years, holding tight to a piece of herself the world figured she'd buried with Henry. I finished that tea, the ice melted to nothing, and felt an ache settle in my chest, not pity, but something closer to awe. Ever lie awake with an old flame dancing in your mind, folks? Maybe a night you'd forgotten till it sneaks back? Drop it in the comments. I'd love to hear if it hits close for you. My pal Doc Evans, a sawbones from Tulsa, told me once over a beer, dreams like that keep the heart pumping, ain't no harm in 'em, and if you're missing that touch, here's a trick from the old days with a new twist. A warm bath can stir the blood without straining the bones. Used to be a hot toddy by the fire. Now it's a soak with a little steam. Give it a whirl and tell me how it goes. Dora's fire was no flicker, it was a blaze, and it got me wondering how many more were out there, burning quiet like her. Dora's bonfire kept smoldering in my mind. Folks, those quiet words of hers peeling back layers, I'd never thought to poke it before. Ray had his dance, Dora had her dreams, and I was half convinced this fire wasn't so rare, after all, maybe just tucked away where folks don't look. But then Mr. Cal strutted into the picture, and he didn't just nudge that notion, he kicked it wide open with a grin and a wink, leaving me wondering how many more like him I'd walked right past without a clue. This goes back to my greener days, mid-20s, when I was slinging hash and pouring coffee at a greasy spoon off Route 66, one of those joints where the air's thick with burnt oil and the jukebox skips every third song like it's got a grudge. Cal was our Saturday regular, 72, weary as a fence post, with a limp he'd picked up in Korea, and a thermos of black coffee he swore beat hours hollow. He'd shuffle in around noon, boots scuffing the cracked linoleum, and park himself at the counter with a grin that said he'd seen the world and liked most of it. Us waitresses, me included, back when I still wore the apron, got the full treatment. Winks, corny lines, a tip of his faded ball cap. "You're a peach, Sally," he'd drawl, or, "Darlin', you light up this dump." I figured it was just old man charm, harmless as a summer breeze, nothing to write home about. But one slow shift, with the diner near empty and the fryer humming like a tired old engine, I caught him leaning over the counter toward Marie, our cook. She was 50-something, broad-shouldered, with a voice that could cut through a barn wall, and a no-nonsense way that'd scare off most flirts. She was flipping burgers, grease popping like tiny firecrackers in the pan, when Cal dropped his voice low, just loud enough for me to hear from the coffee station where I was wiping down a pot. "Marie," he said, "if I were 10 years younger, I'd have you up against that wall before the grease cooled. I damn near dropped that pot. Folks, the clang would have woken the dead if I hadn't caught it in time." Marie, tough as nails, let out a laugh so loud it rattled the plates stacked behind her. "Cal, you old goat," she fired back, flipping a patty without missing a beat. "You couldn't lift me if you had a crane." But he didn't back off, leaned closer, that glint in his eye sharp as a razor. "Don't bet on it, darlin'," he said, voice gravelly with mischief. "I still got some fight left down there, more than you'd reckon." She swatted at him with her spatula, grease flecking the air like Spitfire, but there was no heat in it, just a grin she couldn't hide, big and bright as a harvest moon. Later, when the lunch rush fizzled out, and I was sweeping up crumbs under the stools, I sidled over to Marie, still reeling from what I'd heard. "He's serious?" I asked, keeping my voice low so the lone trucker in the corner wouldn't catch it. She wiped her hands on her apron, stained a decade deep with grease and gravy, and gave me a nod, her smirk fading to something softer. "Dead serious," she said. "Told me once he still gets the itch bad as a burr under a saddle. Takes care of it himself most nights. Says it ain't the same as the real thing. Poor fool's still chasing it like a hound after a rabbit." That hit me like a slap. Folks, Cal wasn't just spinning tall tales to pass the time. He meant it, down to his creaky, limping bones. And it didn't stop there. Over the next few months, he let slip more between bites of his burger how he'd had a fling with a widow from his trailer park a few years back, fumbling through it in her tiny bedroom with the TV blaring loud to drown out the noise. "Wasn't pretty," he told me one day, chuckling over his coffee till it sloshed, "but damn if it didn't feel good. Took me 3 days to walk straight after, like I'd been rode hard and put up wet." I laughed with him, but inside, my head was spinning like a top. This wasn't some dusty memory. It was a live wire still buzzing. Then there was the day he came in quieter than usual, thermos untouched, staring at the counter like it owed him an answer. I asked what was up, and he shrugged, voice rougher than the road outside. "Marie's got a fella now," he said, short and flat. "Guess my shot's gone. I didn't push, just poured him a fresh cup on the house, but I saw it, that hunger still gnawing at him, even when the odds stacked up high against him. He wasn't a dirty old coot or a fool spinning yarns. He was alive, still reaching for something most folks figured he'd left in the rearview. Ever met a fire like that's still burning bright, folks? Maybe someone who wouldn't let age call the shots? Drop it in the comments. I'd love to hear what tricks kept it going for you back in your day. Doc Evans says solo time's fine if it keeps you happy. Used to be a quiet night with a Sears catalog. Now it's whatever works behind closed doors. But if you've got a partner, a slow dance in the kitchen might spark more than you think. Give it a try and let me know. Cal was like a signpost I didn't know I needed, pointing me to a truth I was only half ready to see. And it wasn't long before that truth hit even closer to home. Cal's signpost stuck with me. Folks that live wire of his buzzing in that diner rattled around in my head like a loose bolt on a tractor. Ray had his Clara, Dora had her dreams, Cal had his stubborn chase, and each one peeled back another layer of this thing I'd never given much thought to before. I figured I'd seen enough to piece it together, but life's got a way of tossing you a curve when you least expect it, don't it? The next jolt hit closer to home than I ever reckoned, and it came from the last fella I'd have pegged my own pop, a man I thought I knew like the back of my hand. This was a few years back, after Mom had been gone 5 winters. Her heart quit one January, quick and quiet as a whisper, leaving Pop rattling around alone in that drafty old house up in Missouri. He was 83 by then, a weary old cuss with hands gnarled from decades of wrestling tractors, and a voice that growled like an engine idling on its last fumes. I'd drive up every month or so to check on him, hauling a sack of groceries and a 6-pack of his cheap beer, the kind that tastes like regret, but he swore by it. I figured he was just coasting through the day's cards with the boys, coffee at the diner, maybe a nap in his creaky recliner. But one fall evening, with the leaves crunching underfoot and the air sharp with wood smoke, he threw me a twist that nearly knocked me off my pins. We were holed up in his kitchen, a cramped little den with peeling wallpaper and a table that wobbled if you leaned too hard. The light was dim, just a single bulb flickering overhead like it was on its last legs, and the place smelled of stale coffee, and the pot of chili simmering on the stove Pop's one trick in the kitchen. Thick with beans and a kick of cayenne that'd wake a dead man. I was cracking open a beer, the hiss cutting through the quiet, when he set his can down slow and deliberate, like he was handling dynamite. He started fidgeting with the label, peeling it off in little strips that fluttered to the table, and mumbled, "You ever think about your old man still, feeling things down there?" I blinked, folks' beer halfway to my mouth, and I set it down hard enough to slosh foam over the rim like a mini flood. "What's that, Pop?" I said, half sure I'd misheard over the chili bubbling behind us. He cleared his throat, a rough, gravelly growl, and tried again, eyes still glued to the can like it might save him. "There's this gal, Ruth, from the card club. She's spry, got a nice smile that lights up the room. And lately I've been thinking about her." That way, his ears went red, creeping up past his thinning white hair like a brush fire, and he kept shredding that label into confetti, scattering it across the table. I sat there, jaw hanging loose, the chili's steam curling up in wisps, and tried to wrap my head around it. My pop, the guy who'd spent 50 years with Mom, who'd barely courted her before they tied the knot, was sitting here, 83 years old, blushing like a schoolboy caught passing notes. "You mean that way?" I finally croaked, voice cracking like a dry twig. He nodded, quick and sharp, then muttered, "Ain't acted on it. Mind you wouldn't know where to start. But she walks by in them slacks, and damn if I don't feel a stir down below, like I'm still a fool kid chasing skirts." Folks, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The room tilted, like I'd had one too many of those beers. I pushed the chili around my bowl, spoon clinking against the edge, and managed, "How long you been feeling this?" He shrugged, still dodging my eyes like a guilty pup. "Few months, maybe. Started when she brought me a pie after that cold snap cherry. Real good, crust flaky as all get out. We got to talking over coffee, and next thing I know, I'm lying awake, thinking stuff I ain't thought since your mom was around, stuff that'd make her laugh and swat me with a dish rag." He paused, then added, real quiet, "Even went and bought her flowers once, daisies, like she mentioned she liked. Didn't give 'em to her, though chickened out. Tossed 'em in the trash before she saw, like some dang fool that punched me right in the gut. Folks, not just the wanting, but the way it tangled him up inside. I could see it in the slump of his shoulders, the way his fingers gripped the can like it was the only thing keeping him steady. He wasn't some old goat-chasing tale. He was wrestling with a spark he thought had burned out long ago, and it left him half ashamed, half alive. "Pop," I said, leaning in close, "you're human, ain't nothing wrong with that. Mom'd probably get a kick out of it, knowing you're still kicking." He grunted, half a laugh, half a growl, and finally met my eyes, a flicker of a grin breaking through. "Maybe," he said. "Still feels damn strange, like I'm too old to be this dumb again." I drove home that night, the highway stretching dark and empty under a sky full of stars, and kept turning it over in my head. Pop hadn't done a thing with Ruth far as I know. He never did. But that spark was there, flickering under all those years, raw and tender as a fresh bruise. Ever seen that kind of fire sneak up on someone you love, folks? Maybe a blush you didn't expect, a thought they kept under wraps. What got you through a moment like that? Drop it in the comments. I'd love to hear your take. Doc Evans told me once, "Shame's the thief talk it out with a pal, and it loses its grip." Worked for Pop when I gave him that nod if it's nodding you up. Swap a story with someone close and see how it lightens the load. That night with Pop was a mirror I didn't see coming, and it set me up for the last stretch of this road we're on. Pop's mirror hung there in my mind, folks reflecting back Ray, Dora, Cal, and now him, all tangled up in a knot I'd never thought to unravel before. It was like flipping over a rusty old bucket and finding a mess of life, still wriggling underneath stubborn, messy, and a little wild. I'd spent years figuring that fire of wanting was just for the young bucks, that once the knees creaked and the hair thinned, it was all rocking chairs, bingo nights, and maybe a nap or two. But these folks, they were the last stretch of a road I didn't even know I was traveling, and they made me stop and look square at the truth of it all. Let's roll it back a bit, folks, and walk through the dust we've kicked up together. There's Uncle Ray, 79 and spry as a fox, sneaking off with Clara for their old dance under that Arkansas moon, giggling like kids behind a creaky bedroom door that had seen more summers than I could count. I can still hear those crickets chirping and smell the gravy soaking into that cornbread it's burned into me, that spark they refuse to let die. Then Dora, down on the Gulf, 86 and frail as a dried leaf, lying awake with Henry's rough hands haunting her dreams. Her voice steady as she owned that hunger like it was her birthright. Cal, 272, limping into that diner with his thermos and his bold talk, chasing Marie with a heat that wouldn't quit, even if it mostly flickered solo in the dark. And Pop, my own blood, 83, blushing over Ruth's smile, fumbling with beer cans and daisies he never gave. Caught between shame and a stir he couldn't shake. They're all different, ain't they? Ray's got his partner in crime. Dora's got her quilt-wrapped memories. Cal's got his lonesome fight. And Pop's got his quiet ache. But they're all reaching for the same old flame. That pull, that itch, the one we hush up when the years pile on like firewood. I kept asking myself, is this some rare breed of stubborn? A glitch in the works? Or are we just kidding ourselves thinking it's supposed to sputter out? So I went digging, folks, because stories alone wouldn't settle it. I needed a little meat on these bones. I rang up an old buddy, Doc Evans, a sawbones out in Tulsa, who's patched up more folks than I've had hot dinners. Over a scratchy phone line, with his mutt yapping in the background like it owned the place, I laid it all out: Ray, Dora, Cal, Pop, the whole crew. Doc, I said, is this normal? Or are they just a bunch of oddballs keeping the fire stoked? He let out a laugh, big and booming, rattling through the receiver like a thunderstorm. Normal as rain, you dang fool, he said. Hormones might taper off, but the wiring don't quit. Half the folks over 70 still feel that itch, and plenty scratch it if they can. Long as it's safe and keeps 'em grinning, it's healthy, gets the blood moving better than a brisk walk. That stuck with me, folks, half of 'em, he said. I dug into some dusty articles later, squinting at my screen like an old coot, and he wasn't spinning yarns. The numbers dance a bit, but the tune's the same. Lots of us seniors keep that fire lit, whether it's a roll in the hay with a sweetheart, a solo spin under the covers, or just a dream that sets the pulse jumping. And it ain't just the fellas. Dora's proof of that, holding her Henry close in her head, and I'd bet my last nickel she's got plenty of company out there. So where's that leave us, folks? Ray and Clara giggling behind closed doors, Dora dreaming of Henry's bear like grunts, Cal plotting moves on Murray like a lovesick hound, Pop blushing over Ruth like a kid with a crush. They're not freaks or sick in the head. They're us, or who we might be when the calendar flips a few more pages. We draw these lines in the dirt. Sex is for the young. Old age is for knitting and naps. But life don't play by our rules. It keeps rolling, messy and raw as a fresh plowed field, and sometimes it's a hand brushing yours that lights the fuse. Sometimes it's a memory that keeps you up past midnight with a grin you can't wipe off. If that's a glitch, well, I'd call it one worth keeping. Doc's right, it keeps the blood pumping, sure, but it's more than that. It's proof we don't just fade into the wallpaper we flicker. We fight, we feel. Back in the day, it was stolen glances over a barn dance or a creaky bed with a quilt your mama sewed now. It might be a slow touch, a warm word, or a little trick to keep things humming. If the body's stiff, a pillow under the hips can work wonders. Ray'd tell you that with a wink. If the mind's shy, swap a story with your gal or your fella. Pop said it lightened his load more than a cold beer ever did. What's your trick for keeping that fire stoked, folks? Ever felt it sneak back when you thought it had burned out? Maybe a look, a laugh, a late night thought. Drop it in the comments. You're the real experts here, and your stories keep this pot simmering. I've got more to chew on just around the corner, so stick with me. We're not done stirring up the dust yet.